Today we've got a ton of material to cover, so I am moving pretty quickly, but if you have a question or issue, please raise your hand and I'll stop and we'll get that answered, okay? On Saturday, November 7th, 1992, at about 5 o'clock, Linwood Drake III left the house where he'd been crashing on the couch in Arroyo Grande. He drove to Morro Bay over on the coast, and he went to his former landlord's house who had evicted him about 3 months before, 80-year-old Mr. Laszlo. He killed him, shot him. Mr. Laszlo's common-law wife was there. He didn't do anything to her. He left, and he went about 15 minutes away in Morro Bay and shot a former neighbor who had testified against him in his eviction hearing three months earlier. Another man who happened to be there, wrong place, wrong time, shot him, killed him, and then shot a fourth man. At the time, between when he left Laszlo's house and the other one, Laszlo's common-law wife called 911 and said that, told about the shooting and said it was Crazy Jim, which should be your first sign. Anyone who's got a nickname of Crazy, there's something wrong with them. So the police were looking for him. He turned up about 5 hours later in Paso Robles at a card room where he had lost all his money the prior Thursday night. He had grease paint on his face, had a shotgun. He killed 3 more people there, drove up to San Miguel about 15 miles above Paso, walked into another former landlord's house, a 60-year-old woman, I've forgotten her name. She's asleep. He started beating her to wake her up, kept her hostage till 5 in the morning. Police surrounded the building and he killed himself. In his pocket, they found a rambling suicide note and a list of 20 to 25 people that he had intended to kill that day. I knew Linwood Drake. About 4 hours before he went on his rampage, I had kicked him out of my Wells Fargo branch that I managed. And I had kicked him out of branches in Paso Robles, San Luis Obispo, Atascadero over the last 2 or 3 prior years. A little bit different on Saturday, on that particular Saturday. He'd come in, he'd loiter, he'd get on the phone, and he'd stay on the phone for hours. A real strange guy. I closed his accounts, told him he couldn't come back. And you'll see that that was sort of a theme in his life later. On Monday morning, when all the investigators were swarming over all the sites and they made it to my branch, I found out I had made his most favorite people list. And I'm always thankful for Wells Fargo that they closed at 3 o'clock on Saturdays and they weren't open on Sundays, because he had to move on to his next people. I had forgotten about Linwood for 4 or 5 years, and then when I got more into human resources and employment law, I started looking back at him as I got more and more experience, and he is an absolute textbook case of workplace violence potential. Everything about him, you couldn't have created a more perfect subject. There are 2 kinds of people that go to this extreme in my experience. There are the genetic psychopaths, the Hannibal Lecter types, the Jeffrey Dahmers. Totally unpredictable. There's nothing you can do about them. They're smart. They don't give you any warning signs, and so we're terrified of them because there's nothing you can do. The upside with those is that they're 1 in a million. They don't come along that often. The other kind are what I call sort of organic psychopaths. They're the ones that might be wired a little bit differently to begin with, and it doesn't mean they're going to do anything bad. But over the course of their life, there's a bunch of things that happen to them that send them that direction. The downside is there's for every Jeffrey Dahmer, there's probably 500 Linwood Drakes or potential. That's frightening. The upside, why I'd rather deal with this guy, is that they are so predictable. And you can see them coming from 2, 3, 4 years, 20 years in advance, that we can actually plan for these guys. And those are the ones I'm going to focus on today. And I hope that by the end of it, you look at it and say, okay, this is not rocket science. We can spot these people in advance and deal with them before they get to Linwood Drake. I found this interesting. Practically no one in Richmond was surprised to learn that Woody Drake, so now he's Woody, he's Crazy Jim, Woody Drake had gunned down 6 people in California. The next year, probably 3 months, I don't think you even need to wait a year, the next time there's one of these workplace shootings where some disgruntled person comes in and shoots 3 or 4 people, I think I saw one yesterday. In the first 48 hours, I want you to pay attention to the news reports that come out. It's shocking. I just can't believe it. This is not a person I would ever imagine would do this. In the first 48 hours, that's what all the feedback is. At about 48 hours and the next 48 after that, it totally changes. Reporters, investigators start digging, and you start hearing about, oh, this person had a misdemeanor arrest for vandalism. They were separated from their wife and had a restraining order against them. They had made some threats. Suddenly all this stuff comes out. And it takes about 4 days to go from this person being choir boy to being psychopath. And I'm going to talk about why that is. And it's all part of our unwillingness to look at people critically and instead of thinking the best, analyzing based on objective facts. And as HR professionals, as owners, as management, as supervisors, we need to be able to do that. It's not personal. There are certain factors. I want you to recognize them and act on them. Pretty broad topic, workplace violence. They're all pretty self-explanatory, except for maybe product tampering. And the other one that we're seeing now is computer tampering. People getting in and destroying your computer system on their way out. Unfortunately, it's generally the MIS people that are doing it. But we put so much faith in them to run the system. When they go sideways, we've generally got some problems. And all of these are considered, in my mind, considered workplace violence or potential workplace violence. CDC says that violence has reached epidemic proportions. And you always get this question, or you hear this debate. Is it more common now than it was 20 years ago, or do we hear about it more because of all of the exposure with the internet and the 24-hour news cycle? My personal opinion is that it is more common now because there are more people, closer proximity, what you would think is a more pressure-filled lifestyle. There aren't a lot of the two-parent, one at home, kids come home, play all afternoon, everybody eats dinner at 6 and in bed by 8 and life is great. We don't see that as much anymore. And I think that cumulatively is having an effect on people. The economy certainly is adding to that problem. Increased cost of health insurance. So I do think it's increasing, and I think it will continue to increase. You're going to be dealing with this more. 111,000 violent incidences per year. That doesn't include threats. 750 to 1,000 people a year are murdered in the workplace. They're not killed by equipment. They're not getting in car accidents. Somebody is actually killing them in the workplace. I was shocked at that number. To me, it would be, 20, 30, I don't know, but 1,000 people? What's even more frightening is the effect it has on women. It's the second leading cause of death overall. It's the first leading cause of death for women in the workplace, more than industrial accidents. And it's generally a disgruntled boyfriend coworker or a separated husband that's doing it. So when I refer to him or he, that's generally the case. I've dealt with lots and lots of of nutballs, and probably only a couple were women, and none of them killed anybody. So sorry, guys. Patterns. What we want to look for is patterns. And one of the problems in HR is that we get a problem, we deal with it in a vacuum. We need to start looking, not what is the issue in front of me, but what's the problem, what's the big picture, what are the background facts. It says Woody Drake liked to beat up women. This is a guy who wrote an article on him. After I threw him out of the Biograph, that was a theater where he worked in the 70s, several people told us stories about various females he had hurt. He had his first arrest for domestic violence, I believe, at age 19. He ended up killing people at age 47, 48. So this was a long, long history that at various points popped up with him. And he had rage against women. That is not uncommon as a red flag with people who commit violence in the workplace. And the reason, I think, is, and we'll see in some later slides, most of them are different. They don't get along very well with people. They have no support system. They don't have a lot of friends. They're a little bit different at work. They're awkward. They try to make friends or start relationships with women in the workplace, and they get rejected, and that just makes them more angry. And so it's not uncommon to have it focus on women. So when I see an issue where an employee is complaining or concerned about a guy who makes her uncomfortable or says weird things or hangs around her desk, in one sense you might say, okay, it's an irritating guy, tell him to stop. I got bells going off in my head because that is such a common theme looking backwards after an incident of workplace violence. So that's one of those that you say, I'm going to put that in my head. I'm going to keep an eye on that when I hear that. What causes it, or who? Disgruntled employees. Very common. They come back to the workplace. Domestic disturbance is right up there. For all the shootings and beatings I've seen, I'd say it's 50-50. Disgruntled employee and separated spouse or ex-boyfriend. Sometimes you get both. It's an employee who was fired who was dating someone, and you get the double whammy on them. And then the delusional person. This is usually sort of the stalker that one of your employees met at the symposium or expo where you had a booth, and they get obsessed and they come around. Those aren't too common. They're pretty easy to spot. They're really weird. And those are ones you want to act on really, really quickly. There's generally not much debate. If someone who met your employee once is obsessed and texting and coming to the office and you tell them to stop and they do it again, you got your hands full. There's something not right with that person. The disgruntled employee, generally a long-term employee, long tenure. A stressor causes violence, and the act is a result of a trigger, okay? Our job as HR professionals is to make sure that we aren't the ones that cause that kind of end of the line. What's the most common end of the line trigger? Termination, absolutely. I put lots of time and thought into terminations that I'm handling. And I don't know if I've ever asked anyone in this group before, but I'll just throw it out to you. I don't know how many terminations I've been involved in. I would say it's probably in the hundreds. Anyone want to guess how many times those have gotten violent? 1, 0? All of them? 25? The answer is 0. And it's not because I'm so great at terminating people, and it's not random luck. It's that the ones where I've done the analysis that they could go sideways, I don't do those in person. We do them over the phone. We have a CHP officer there. We hire security. But that's planning. That's saying, okay, I'm looking at these factors. I'm familiar with them. I'm not going to put myself in that situation. We know it's a trigger. It's the most common trigger, so that's where you really have to think about these things. There's nothing that says, and I get this in seminars all the time, someone told me that you should never terminate someone over the phone. Nonsense. If you got some psycho who you don't want to deal with and they're going to beat someone, send them a letter, you know, and send it on a day when you're going to be closed for 2 days and everyone goes out of town. There's always exceptions to the rule. That's one of the exceptions. It's okay to do. In a domestic disturbance, the violence spills over into the workplace, and lots of us have seen that. Generally, the way it presents itself, you've got a good employee, usually a good employee, female employee, out of character performance issues, getting there late, upset, generally single mom, and you hear rumors of a separation, and then there's multiple threats of restraining orders, and then it doesn't go through, and then it does go through. You see that coming, you've got a big red flag for potential violence in your workplace. Why do they do it at the workplace? Yeah, it's simple. They know that they're going to be there. They know where to find them. Captive audience. Also, a lot of these guys are obsessed that in their mind, the reason their wife is leaving them has nothing to do with them not having a job, taking meth, and beating them, but it's because someone at work has poisoned her on them. There's always somebody. It's the poor coworker who happens to be a guy in his cubicles next to hers. And it has to be something there. So that's another reason they come to the workplace looking for people. And then obviously financial issues play into that. It's usually a pattern. You show me a woman who's having trouble with a disgruntled ex-husband at work, you know, the ones that are above and beyond the general acrimony of a divorce, and I'll show you a guy who's probably unemployed. Courts have probably ordered him to pay beyond what he's able to pay, and it just kind of stacks on top of itself. Does it happen every time? Bless you. No. But in my mind, when I see that, I got another bell going off, and I'm going to analyze it a little bit differently. The delusional person, I'm pretty straightforward. It's perceived wrongs, conspiracy theorists. We see it sometimes with customers. I see it with medical groups. There's a patient that's convinced all the doctors are trying to kill him or her. But they keep coming back in, which I don't get. If the doctor's trying to kill you, stop going to the doctor. Or they're obsessed with an employee who got them fired. A supervisor, if you ever hear this in a performance, well, she's out to get me. He's out to get me. You hear that a lot. Well, I'd pay attention to that because that is I'm not taking responsibility. It must be somebody else who's trying to get me. That makes me uncomfortable when I hear that. The FBI has studied serial killers for years. We're fascinated. How can someone next door, so normal, 30 years, no flags, go out and kill 8 people? I'm more concerned with the run-of-the-mill 500 of these guys that go out, beat people, light stuff on fire, and shoot people. FBI is catching on to that. They have started studying these workplace violence scenarios, and what they have found is the brain and the chemical reaction in serial killers, serial rapists, which is a violence crime, and workplace violence, it's almost identical. The stressors and the reaction, the chemical reaction is almost identical. So when you say, okay, it's a disgruntled employee, if you changed that term and said, oh, we're going to terminate a serial killer, you would treat it differently. You'd think about it differently. And that's what we need to think about in trying to get ahead of the curve. So who commits violence? I had a question yesterday in a seminar. Someone said, well, you know, we've got this vendor or customer and they're the ones doing it. What can we do? Well, you can do lots of stuff. The employer is responsible for the safety of their employees. Employees can be the perpetrator, former employees, the family members, contractors, customers, vendors, the UPS guy. Anyone who is coming onto your workplace or who is interacting with your employees is someone we want to pay attention to if there are issues that I'm discussing right now. Look for patterns, profiles. We're always told, You know, don't look at people in a group, look at them individually. When it comes to workplace violence, look for patterns and practices. You might be wrong 99 out of 100 times, but that one time you're right, you're going to be glad that you were. Don't ignore warning signs. My grandfather always says, don't look crazy in the eye. I disagree with that. His philosophy is you're walking down the street, crazy guy's coming at you, just turn away, let him chase somebody else. I have found in dealing with crazy lots of times that I'm going to shine a light on it. People who act differently, the people that are wired differently, are used to people shying away. It gives them more room to maneuver. They make people uncomfortable. I found that if I make them uncomfortable, that we get a little bit further. It's a little bit better for me to not ignore that. I'll give you an example. At my other office, about 2 years ago, a guy shows up. We had the FBI in our building. Guy shows up and he's got a sandwich board on it, and he's standing out in front, and he looked a little off, you know, clothes a little messy, hair a little messy, eyes a little funny looking. He's got the sandwich board that says, FBI, stop persecuting my wife and children. I watched out my window, which looked right down on him, for about 4 hours. Everyone just, whoosh, they walked out that door, they go out the back door. No one wanted to talk to this guy, but everyone was worried about him. The lunchroom, everyone's talking about this guy. I couldn't take it anymore. I went downstairs, I walked up to him, I said, hey, what's your story? You're standing out here making people uncomfortable. Are you a nut? Are you armed? I asked him if he had explosives. What's your issue? And the guy explains to me in rational terms the issue. It didn't make any sense, but he talked normally. I think no one had talked to him in a couple of days. He was happy to talk. And what he was saying didn't make sense. And I just said that, you know, that doesn't make sense. You're freaking people out. At some point, they're going to call the police. They're going to take you away. Do yourself a favor. Go somewhere else. Go do something constructive. And the guy left. He did something else because he was used to being able to operate without anybody calling him on it. And so I do look crazy in the eye in the workplace. If you hear someone comes up and says, well, I think it was threatening. He made me uncomfortable. It was sort of a threat. I want to know that. I don't want to give them the benefit of the doubt and say, well, I could have interpreted that differently. I'm going to sit them down and say, I don't like what you just said. Why don't you expand on that? What do you mean by that? Someone says, well, I'll take care of this later. Well, what do you mean by that? Shine the light on it. It's like cockroaches. Pick up a rock, shine the light under there. The cockroaches run away. Okay? Don't be afraid of it. Employment profiles, the test, the Myers-Briggs. Some people think that can spot potential workplace violence. I'm not a big fan of it. It only takes a sliver of time. And also, generally the people that are analyzing the data aren't sophisticated enough to spot it. I think that you're a lot better off using your common sense. Employment references, job history will tell you a lot. You're interviewing somebody and they start talking about how their supervisor at their last job, they're explaining why they had multiple jobs in a short period of time. If they say to you, well, at this job, oh, the supervisor was out to get me. I was the best employee there. It was that supervisor. Oh, and the next one, my boss and I, we just didn't. You start hearing that everybody has wronged them. Man, they jump up about 20 notches on the potential nut scale. Okay? It's a not me. It's a lack of self-awareness. It doesn't mean you don't hire them, but I would certainly dig a little bit further. Listen for clues. The monotone, we give name, date, and serial number and nothing more. When you call for a reference, that worries me. Ask the people, are they eligible for rehire? Sometimes they'll answer it. If they don't answer it, I've got warning bells going off. If you know of someone who used to work with them, ask about it. Because HR doesn't know half as much as all the employees know. All employees know everything about everybody. You know, that's what happens. They go to the supervisor after one of these shootings. Oh, I had no idea. And then you go to the employees. Oh, that was the weirdest guy here. Everybody knew it. Happens all the time. Well, why didn't you say anything? And we'll get to that. I'll talk about why employees never tell anybody about it. Not every case. Some of the indications, white male, 30 to 50. I think that's getting older. I've seen some 55, 60-ish. And I think that's because aging workforce, that number's going to expand a little bit. But it's generally 40 to 60, middle-aged guy with a lot of nothing good going on in their life. When I say problem employee, I don't mean a problem in that they're just the one that makes everyone mad all the time. Problem can manifest itself in a lot of different ways. There's almost always performance problems. There's almost always problems with communication and interaction with other people. They're the person that keeps lists of everything. And Linwood was famous for keeping lists. Linwood Drake, from age of 17 on, at almost all times, he had a list of people who had wronged him. And that morphed into people he was going to kill. But anyone who does that, it's sort of an obsession thing. Okay, that's what I mean by a problem employee. The one who sends all of these emails, the one who makes people uncomfortable, says comments that you just go, that's a little strange. There might be a history of violent behavior, vandalism, resisting arrest, domestic violence. You take 100 of these people that have committed workplace violence and you look at their history, I'll bet you in the 90s, up to 90-something% of them have had some sort of domestic violence in the past. Why is that? Anybody? Come on, be brave. No idea. 2 reasons. Anyone who will beat somebody they say they love, they don't care about their coworkers at all. They're just non-entities. And secondly, the stress manifests itself in those relationships. Sometimes that's the only person left that they have a relationship with. And usually it's not good. Someone who's trying to separate from them. By that point, they don't have friends, they don't have a job, sometimes they don't have coworkers. They're deteriorating. The last person is the spouse, the girlfriend, the significant other. And that is a precursor to violence on other people. They intimidate other people, not necessarily overtly. It's not the big muscle guy that walks in and bosses everyone around. They intimidate them through looking at them, sending texts or emails that aren't appropriate, by vandalizing. If you have a single employee that's having a dispute with another employee or has had some history, and that person's car gets keyed, tires slashed, strange dents and bumps more than once, you probably have a problem. There's something, it's a passive-aggressive thing. Usually it's a guy. Sometimes women will do that too. Women will key cars and slash tires. I've seen that a lot. But that to me is a red flag. You'd think, oh, we're just in a bad part of town, it's in the parking lot. It's probably somebody in your workplace. Substance abuse, yes?
At work, as an HR professional, one of the things that is sometimes a red flag is somebody asking for more information than they need, trying to get information stuff from other people from a manager position.
Yes.
I have actually gone through that.
Yes.
And the guy will ask for HR stuff, information about employers, and the system that will come and tell me, should I give it to him? No, no, no.
Yeah, they're trying to get information. It's a control, it's a power thing. Substance abuse, possible substance abuse. It's generally not meth or illegal drugs. I've seen a lot more of mixture of antidepressants, mood altering, Vicodin, OxyContin, Valium, all mixed in together. Because they go to different doctors for different issues and no one's managing it, and you start to see that. So there's generally some sort of substance abuse within the people who actually commit violence. And these are the ones I said, if you could take all of them and look backwards, these are the factors that we look for more often than not. This is so cliche, and it's so true. People who talk, guys who talk about their guns are not normally normal. There's something off. Hunters, very rarely, the people who you think would have guns legally, hunters, trap shooters, whatever, they might talk to someone else who appreciates guns about, hey, I got this thing and it worked great, but I didn't like this or that. That's the normal conversation. The guy who keeps the magazines on his desk, he's got his screensaver, talks about the guns, references the guns, talks about the gun classes, talks about how on the side they're in the CIA, or they're a security guard, or they're undercover for the DEA. Just weird stuff. Anything having to do with guns or law enforcement fantasies, that's a big red flag. Nobody ever walks in, shows a picture of a 5-shot 22, this big, and brags about it. These guys, I mean, anyone's showing you machine guns and 18 chamber shotguns or 18 shell shotguns, those are the ones I want to know about that. And that's the one I'm going to pull in as an HR person and say, you know what, you're making people uncomfortable. Why is it you talk about guns a lot? Is this something I need to worry about? That's a conversation that you can have. Interested in acts of violence, that's the typical, that's more kind of the crazy genetic person. Open or veiled threats, very common. In all of these incidences that you see on television, when they go back and start digging around, there is always a threat to somebody that has been made, and it was public. Somebody knew about it. It wasn't like they just wrote it down and put it in their drawer. There are almost always test threats on someone who commits violence. And it can go back a year or 2 or 3. And I'm telling you, once you get to the end of this and you start looking at it, you look back and say, man, we could have caught this stuff 5 years ago. Unfortunately, what's going to happen now is you're going to interview 10 people and you're going to call the police on 9 of them and shoot the 10th one because they're crazy. Obsessed with their job, not with doing it well, but having it. They're obsessed with keeping it because they got nothing left. They go home to an empty apartment. They don't have normal social interactions. They don't even get on the internet sometimes because they don't have the financial ability to maintain the internet account or the computer. And so really their only real value to themselves is the job. Unfortunately, with all the other stuff going on, the performance is usually poor. Very rarely, in fact, I can't think of a time where I was involved in one of these where the perpetrator was a stellar employee. There was always a lot of stuff going on. And then a loner. I mean, that's cliche too, but it's true. It's the person that everyone later says, oh yeah, they ate by themselves, they were kind of weird, nobody really liked that person. The one that was a choir boy 2 days ago, oh, he was real sweet and quiet. And then it morphs into, oh, he was a loner and he threatened me and made me uncomfortable. Some more factors. They're paranoid. Paranoid that someone's trying to get their job. Someone's trying to get them fired. They'll come in and tell you something about PG&E. Just oddball story. PG&E is trying to do something. PG&E doesn't know who any of us are. And they're doing it to all of us, you know. Hope no one here is from PG&E, but PG&E doesn't care about one guy. They don't. So anyone who says PG&E's focus on them, big red flag. Can't take criticism. Everything is everybody else's fault. Now, none of us like criticism. We don't like taking criticism, but if every single thing you say to them, they come back with a 10-page email and it implicates 3 other coworkers and PG&E and their doctor, not cool. Something you want to keep an eye on. They hold a grudge against everybody, and they talk about it too. You go back and talk to coworkers when something like this has happened, and they'll tell you, they'll go on and on about all the different drama that they had going in their life. You show me someone who's got 3 small claims court cases pending, I'll tell you somebody I'm going to keep an eye on because they hold a grudge and they're obsessed with other things. And then conspiracy theories. Any questions? Anything I said that doesn't make sense? Any psychiatrists in here that say, you don't know what you're talking about? I'm not a psychiatrist. I just deal with crazy people. No support system at all. Very, very common. They've generally alienated everybody around them. So what do we do? There are different roles. The supervisor has a role, HR has a role, and then the organization has a role. And these are just sort of things that I've gleaned over the years. The workforce has to be educated that this is not the sky is falling, but it is a real issue in the workplace. It happens. Supervisors have to recognize that there are things they need to keep an eye on, and they need to know when to ask for help. You need to take employee concerns seriously. Employee comes and says to you, oh, you know, I had a screaming match with so-and-so. Okay, you can deal with the screaming match and deal with it in a bubble. I want to know what the history is. I'm going to ask, is this the first time? What's happened in the past? I might talk to someone else and say, what's your opinion of such and such? Because to me, that's a potential symptom. I don't want to make a mistake looking at this as a one-time event. Is there more going on? Is there stuff going on at home? And those are the facts that the supervisors need to listen for. When I said that the employees know everything that HR doesn't, supervisors are in a pretty good spot to pick up on that stuff. They know when someone gets to work crying. They know when someone has to take off to go to a court hearing. Those are the things I want to know about as an HR person. You know, run it up the flagpole, let HR know. Understand what resources are available for people who are struggling. And then if need be, sometimes we need to bring in assistance, psychiatric assistants, police, medical professionals. As safety managers, as HR folks, as management team, we have to educate the supervisors and say to them, they're sort of the basket that catches all this stuff that never makes it to us, and we need to know that information to make decisions. We need to include them as part of a threat assessment. You know, if we're doing something where we've got some red flags, we want the right people in there. I want safety, I want HR, I want someone from EAP maybe. I want the supervisor there. Because the supervisor, when we start talking about this stuff, they go, oh yeah, you know, I did notice this or that. And they might not have noticed it without being involved in that conversation. Look for the red flags, be familiar with them. Manage problems actively. Don't sit back and wait for the next time. You know, and I go back to these threats. It happens all the time. Someone says something that we think's a threat, and so we kind of get it all resolved, and then we say we're going to keep an eye on them. But it's kind of floating around back there. You got to actively manage that. Don't wait for it to happen again. It gives them another sense of power. Hey, I did it before and nothing happened to me. You need to take that power away. And listen to your inner voice. I know it is totally not politically correct to judge people based on criteria or factors or common traits. You know, we got to look at people as individuals. I am telling you, people that commit workplace violence have common traits. It's okay to look at those traits. We're not saying this person's a bad person. We're saying this person has potential. Their potential is a lot higher than other people to do something. And I want to make sure that I don't trigger that. So that's okay, and you know it. I mean, if you have a meeting with someone and they leave and it's bugging you, you're uncomfortable, there's something there. The organization's role, once again, educate the workforce, educate the supervisors. Prepare a response plan. It doesn't have to be every week we're going to do a drill, but you need to think about it. You know, walk through, what would I do if? Do we have secure offices? Does this door lock automatically? Do we want people to be able to come in through the back door of the kitchen without going through the front? Yeah, probably not. It's convenient for the good employees. I don't want it convenient for the bad ones. So just like you do your IIPP, you walk around, you look for OSHA-type threats or problems, accidents, do the same thing with safety. You know, do we have a buzzer door on the front? Who are the people that are most likely to be in danger in one of these circumstances? Okay? In analyzing performance, in the back of your mind, subconsciously analyze potential for violence. It doesn't have to be the overriding, but have it there. Regularly assess how prepared you are and seek advice of professionals. One of the hardest ADA, DFEH type reasonable accommodations to deal with, mental disabilities. I struggle with it too because it's got all the things that every other issue has, you know, performance problems and whatnot, but they're being caused by something that we don't understand as HR professionals. We're not qualified to handle psychiatric and psychological issues. Sometimes we need to get help. Fitness for duty, occupational medical, send someone for a psychiatric fitness exam. Get that person's permission to speak with their physician so we know what we're dealing with. Okay, it's okay to ask for that help. Any questions so far? Okay. You should have a team, a group of people. Maybe you go to some classes that kind of do this together. Don't leave it on one person's shoulder. A lot of the employee assistance programs that come with your insurance, you know, they have different options available and 24-hour hotlines. Make sure employees know about those. Make it a specific part of training for your personnel if you've got larger organizations. You know, designate one person who stays educated on these issues, follows the trends and the most recent advice. Medical professionals, when picking an occupational medical provider, ask them, do you have the ability to deal with psychological disabilities, psychiatric, drug abuse? Because that's all part of it. We're going to rely on them. That's what we're hiring them for. Law enforcement. I have done lots of terminations that I was uncomfortable with, and I've called the police department, the sheriff, the CHP, and just said, you know, we got to let someone go. I got some warning factors. I'm a little uncomfortable. And if you use the word potential disturbance of the peace, they actually have a code for that where they're on standby for potential disturbance of the peace. And they'll show up, and they'll stand there. I have never, ever, ever had anyone do anything threatening, say anything threatening when a police officer's standing there. They just don't do it. It changes the dynamic. It takes control from them and gives it back to you. The use of private security sometimes. Sometimes just having someone, and they always say, you know, do they need to have a gun? They don't need to have a gun. Having another person there changes the dynamic. Someone they don't understand. I like putting obstacles in the way of people committing violent acts. First off, we call them on stuff. We stay on top of it. You've got a card key that we can disconnect so you can't come in. We have a buzz-in door. There's someone else standing there, a security guard. When we do performance counseling, we've got 3 people there. Huge difference. Everyone knows the rule. Don't do it yourself, and there's 2. There's a huge difference between 2 and 3. Employees like this have been counseled lots of times. They've been through this thing. Showing up, there's 2 people sitting there. They know what you're going to say before you say it. Put 3 people in there, it throws off the whole dynamic. It's okay to change that on them, create obstacles. And then involve your MIS people in this. A lot of the obstacles that we want are people not getting into computers, not getting into doors, not having PINs and passwords. That's something that in evaluating the safety of your workplace, you can use, maybe you bring in a security expert once every 5 years and just have them look at your facility. They know a lot more than I do. They've dealt with it. They might give you some tips. Let's see, anything I haven't covered. Pre-screening and background investigations. As I said before, never, in hindsight, is this a first-time offender? When someone's really done something violent, there's always something there if you look in the right place. And the places we can look now are on the internet. We can do background checks. We can check references diligently, listen for clues, get educated. We can dig around a little bit. We can analyze resumes more closely, look for gaps, look for things that don't make sense, and actually follow up on it. Lots of people who get into these situations, not all of them, some have been in one place a very, very long time, but some have had lots of turnover. And I want to ask about that and listen to their response. Prepare employees for trigger type events. Think about them. Layoffs, terminations. We do a seminar on rightful termination, on respectful terminations. That's very important to not be the trigger. We want them to transition somewhere else. We can't make them not do something bad, but we can make them not do it in our workplace. Offer job skills. I am convinced that the first 7 days after somebody is involuntarily terminated or after they're laid off, and that's going to be the final nail in their life coffin, if you can make it through 7 days, they're going to move on to something else. Because after 7 days, if they haven't done anything to you, they're going to get obsessed about something else. These are the people that keep lists. They get pissed off at someone every day. So the more days we can get between them and us, the more likely they are to move on to something else. And the way we do that is give them some hope that we're still helping them. Hey, let's talk in a week or two and we'll get you set up with some job training, or we'll give you some assistance in finding a job. If you're going to pay severance, don't give them a check right then. Pay them some amount for the next 3 or 4 months on the regular payday to keep them moving forward and transitioning. I don't want to give them a bunch of money to go buy guns. I want them a little bit of money so that they're not at the end of their rope. They can eat and pay some of their bills. Provide counseling. Offer to help. Listen. I mean, we can't solve their problems, and oftentimes they'll try to get you to change your opinion. You got to stick with the opinion. But we don't want to be the trigger. We want to be one of the few people that is trying to help them. Sometimes you have to consider restraining orders. In the past, maybe 10 years ago, as employers, it was really frustrating because we'd go in to get a restraining order, and the only person that could get it, let's say, would be the girlfriend, the employee. We'd get to the hearing, we'd spend all this time and money, and then they wouldn't go through with it. Now we're stuck. You know, we know this person's dangerous, we can't get a restraining order. Well, they changed that. Now the employer can go in as the plaintiff on behalf of its other employees. It doesn't require the involvement of the threatened employee. Sometimes we have to do that. Go get a restraining order. It doesn't always solve the problem, but in terms of being second-guessed later, I'd rather say, hey, we did what we could, we made this person come to court or not come to court, we got a restraining order. Okay, questions? Yeah.
Within the last 2 weeks, I've had 2 employees, both of them males, come to me with prior ex-spouse issues and harassment that's happening in the workplace. Both of them, they came to me, they were very, very embarrassed.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the hardest thing for them to come. And I thought, you know, the populace of my employees, if I'm hearing from 2 within 2 weeks' time, how many others are just too embarrassed to come forward and say, I'm having this problem, it may end up affecting my work, she or he may come to
Yeah.
the front. Is there anything that we can do to remedy this? So,
Is there anything you can do to remedy it? We can't remedy their problems outside, obviously. I'd put it back on them. What can we do? What can we do for you? You know, is there anything we can do? Now, to me, that's red flag. You might have 20 of those people in your workforce. Okay, that's fine. Well, then maybe 10 of them have a couple others. and then and then you start looking at gender and age and history and friends, and it shrinks, and suddenly, I mean, there will be the one. You can identify the one that you have to keep an eye on. But I would just listen, follow up, ask questions. And it's okay to do that. You're not invading someone's privacy if they come to you. If an employee comes to you and says, hey, I'm having this issue, you're allowed to ask questions. Tell me about this ex-boyfriend. What do we need to be concerned about him? Do you have a support system? Do you want to talk to EAP? Do we need to get the police involved? It's okay to ask those questions. But why don't they? Why don't the employees come to you when there's something they're afraid of? The number one is they don't want to get involved. They're afraid of becoming the target. And this is kind of harsh, but here's what I'd tell them. When these guys come in to shoot people in the workplace, they don't generally say, oh, hey, Bob, what's up? You're cool. No, not looking for you. You know, and then they go look for the person. They do go look for someone, but they shoot everybody on the way to find that person. So you can tell them, look, you can keep this to yourself and try not to make them mad. They're going to shoot you anyway. I mean, it doesn't help to not become a target. I'd rather know about it. Let's deal with them rather than hope that they spare you later. They don't want to get involved. They never want to get involved on the front end, but then later they'll tell you, oh yeah, I knew this, I knew that. They don't recognize the threat. He's just strange. If everybody thinks you're just strange, you're strange. I'm sorry. And I'm not saying that's bad, but if you got a room of 20 people and 19 of them can spot who's strange, they're strange. And if you can't spot them, it's you. Fear of liability. They're afraid they're going to get sued. Slander, wrongful termination. The person's going to sue me if they get terminated. Not so. There's a privilege. A communication within the workplace. People who have the same interest without malice, meaning you're not on purpose making something up, is privileged. You can't be sued for that. So if an employee comes to you and says, I think this guy's a mass murderer, and believes it, you know, based on whatever they're seeing, that's a privileged communication. They can't get sued for that. Now, if they go on the internet and say this person's a psychopath and they're going to kill everybody, well, then they got a different problem. But within the workplace, we can do that, and we can follow up on that. Lack of internal communication. Left hand doesn't know what right hand is doing. Go back to that shooting in Colorado. One whole group of the administration at that college didn't know anything about that guy at all. The other group that included the nurse and the on-campus psychologist, they knew everything about this guy. I mean, same organization, total disconnect. And some of that is we're afraid of HIPAA and we're afraid of invading people's privacy. I will invade one person's privacy if it protects 20 other people. I'll take my chances on that any day, and we can defend that case. We don't want to go to such extremes that we enable a dangerous situation in the workplace. Lack of experience, people in over their head, not realizing that we have a legal obligation to protect. I got the question yesterday where they said, well, we didn't do anything because it's not our employee. No, but they were coming onto your space into the area that you do control, threatening your employee. That is your responsibility, and we need to know that. And that comes from OSHA, personal injury claims, negligence claims, wrongful hiring, serious and willful claims under the workers' comp statutes. Those are all the different ways that the employer can get sued for not dealing with this stuff. Wrongful termination because you accidentally let someone go who in good faith you thought was dangerous and maybe they weren't. That's a loser of a case. You have the discretion of who works in your workplace to some degree, and if you've made a good faith analysis without malice, you let someone go, they're not going to have a wrongful termination case. Everyone's afraid of that. Those cases don't bother me at all. 3 minutes, 4 minutes left for questions, comments, anything that doesn't make sense. Yes.
When they ask for references, if you have somebody who actually, you have a big problem at workplace, and that person actually have charges or was convicted and everything, are you obligated to disclose that is somebody caused because I know it was the case at taxi companies, they did not disclose that one of the drivers had raped somebody, and that guy was hired by another company and raped a customer. So how do you do that? You don't disclose these things ever?
You have no obligation to disclose unless there's some special relationship. You're a temp service and you're putting someone onto someone else's property and you have some continuing obligation. If you give positives, you have to give negatives. If you just say, we don't give anything, dates of employment, last position, there's no affirmative obligation to give that. And if it's someone who's been convicted before, that information can be found. Now, some employers will tell me, hey, I've got a moral obligation to tell this other company what I know. There's a privilege for that too. Reference checks, specifically under the Civil Code. If you give information in good faith without malice, that's a privileged communication. And so you say, instead of saying this person is a psychopathic wife beater, what you might say is, make sure you run a criminal check. I'm not saying anything about them. I'm just saying, go dig. You might find something. That's okay. That's one way of doing it. Saying this person is not eligible for rehire. That's a wonderful way of signaling to another employer that there's something there. So it's just how you do it. And you can do it either way. Like I said, it's privileged, and some people want to do it, some people don't. And that's okay. Okay? I don't want to overstate the importance of one factor or another factor. These are all factors, and it's cumulative. When you see one, and then you see another, and you see another, over a course of a year or two or three, that's the one that you need to deal with. Not everybody who has a restraining order is a bad person, but you throw in 6 or 7 of these other factors, that's the one we want to deal with. So the upside is, 10 years ago, I thought, how do I teach on workplace violence? Who knows? These people are crazy. They just come in and do it. And I've learned they are easier to spot than an embezzler. And I'm pretty good at spotting them. These people just leave lots and lots of clues. And it's just our job to know what they are and be educated and deal with them directly. Okay? Anything we didn't cover? Thank you all very much for coming. Appreciate it, and hope to see you next month.